States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Dominguez. Hart. Here. Hotchkiss. Here. Murillo.
Here.
Rouse. White. Here. Mayor Snyder.
Here. So I believe these slips are for items related to the budget. Is there any public comment for items not related to the budget? Okay, seeing none, I'll open and close public comment. And just to let everyone know what we're going to do, there's going to be a staff presentation with some slides of showing the full picture and what some various options are and what I believe the Finance Committee recommended. And then we'll open it up to your public comment before we bring it back here for deliberations on the budget. So with that, Mr. Samario.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Bob Samario, Finance Director. So back on the 21st of April, we filed the recommended budget with City Council. Since that time, on two separate tracks, we've had the departments all come forward to City Council at public hearings. We had 6 of them, during which they presented their budgets in a fair amount of detail to the City Council. And again, we're dealing with a second year of budget, so the focus was on the changes. On a separate track related to that, the Finance Committee also reviewed certain parts of the budget. There was some overlap, but they did look at some things in more detail, like fees and the like. But they did cover some extra topics or separate topics. So today is, we've wrapped up all that review process, and we're here to get council's direction, final direction, hopefully, on how we move forward toward budget adoption on June 21st. We do have a meeting set aside for June 13th. We don't think we need that. We're hoping we can wrap it up and think we can. So we're going to present sort of all the things that were considered and have a few questions for council as to how we move forward with budget adoption based on the recommendations from the committee and other items that have come up. So I'm going to start with the Finance Committee review and sort of listing the things they went through. And these are a lot of the things are the kinds of things they look at every year. One of the things they look at are the general fund revenue assumptions for our taxes. And we put a lot of time and effort into this because we believe that it's important for the committee and the council to support what we believe are the appropriate assumptions moving forward. Actually, starting this year, what the growth assumptions are and what our assumptions are for the following year in terms of where sales taxes and bed taxes and the like are going to be, because that really sets the table for how much money we believe we're going to have. So those are important for us, and so we make a point to review those with the Finance Committee. And also we include with that the multi-year forecast, so we actually go out a year to see kind of what the trend lines are looking like. We also brought to the Finance Committee the general fund proposed fee changes, and we also brought the enterprise fund fee changes. We didn't spend any more time on the rates for utilities because we spent a lot of time already separately with Finance Committee and Council on those. We also presented a few minor staff recommended adjustments. We presented those to the Finance Committee. It's not unusual since we filed the budget in April for some things to change, so we had some minor tweaks. We don't plan on going over those today, but they're included as an attachment to your agenda report. Again, they're fairly minor. The committee also looked at and this is sort of a late item that was brought to the committee, a proposed new administrative fee for noise disturbances, which I'll talk about, and this is going to be revenued into the general fund that relates to the noise ordinance. The committee also considered funding requests from outside organizations and had some recommendations, which I'll go through. And then we also, at the direction of the Finance Committee, we looked at some options for how we might increase planning and development-related fees, and we'll talk about that. And then lastly, because the Finance Committee looked at these as a way to consider what might be reprogrammed out of our capital program for streets, we're going to provide again to the full council a complete list of all those capital projects. So starting first with the proposed fees for the noise disturbances. So this is, again, part of the noise ordinance implementation, and the fees are structured as follows. There would be an initial warning. The first violation would require or involve a warning, and that would start a 9-month clock. So all these violations that are subsequent to that would be within the 9-month period. And within that 9-month period, if there was a second violation, there would be a $350 administrative fine to the occupant of that property. A third violation would increase that fine to the occupant to $750, and then for the first time impose a fine on the owner of the property. And then the fourth violation would raise it to a $1,000 fine to the occupant and $750 to the owner. And then if we get to that point, which we don't think we're going to need to, but a subsequent violations would be $1,000 to each, the occupant and the owner. There was a lot of community engagement and support for this effort, and just to point out that the fines that we just described were supported by the Santa Barbara City College Neighborhood Task Force, as well as the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association. And then with respect to increasing planning and land development fees, just kind of by way of background, as part of our regular presentation to the committee, we presented all the general fund fees on May 10th. And in the planning division, the staff recommended that we increase most planning division fees by 2%. This is very common, in the 2 to 3% range per year. The Finance Committee directed staff to go back and identify some fees that are most often charged and that are well below full cost recovery, and look at potentially increasing fees somewhere between 10 and 20% where appropriate. So staff came back at a subsequent Finance Committee meeting with this recommendation, which is to leave most of the fees as proposed in the 2017 budget at 2% with some exceptions, and those exceptions would mean increasing certain fees by 15%, and I'll go through those in a moment. In addition to that, they proposed increasing the fee for large AUD projects by 50%, so it would go from $2,820 to $4,230. That's a 50% increase. And it would also include any pre-application review efforts, as well as the Planning Commission Council review efforts. There'd be an increase to that same fee. And then in addition, that they would, the modification pre-application fee, there no longer would be allowed a credit for larger fees, for future fees.
Madam Mayor, may I ask what's the threshold for a larger AUD project, Mr. Samario?
Sure, Ms. Renee Brooke, the city planner, will be able to respond to that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Murillo. For the purposes of that slide, a larger AUD project is those that are required to go to Planning Commission concept review and a pre-application review. So it's those projects within the high density or priority overlay zone and on a lot over 15,000 square feet.
So the fees that are recommended to be increased by 15% would be, at least from staff's perspective, would be appeals. You can see that I've noted the Finance Committee recommended leaving that at 2% rather than increasing it to 15%. And then similarly with annexations, staff had recommended a 15% increase, but the committee recommended to leave that at 2%. The design review fees, the committee supported the 15% increase for those related to multifamily, those at 11 plus units. Consultation, and then review after final. So those design review fees would be increasing by 15%. In addition, the conditional use permits, condo hotel conversion permits, performance standards permits, pre-application review, all Planning Commission and SHO related fees, and then the transfer of existing development rights, all would be proposed to increase by 15% and were supported by the Finance Committee. The estimated budgetary impact, or would be the revenue increase of those additional fees going up to 15%, is $53,000. It's rounded. Most of that would be in community development. The remaining 11,000 would be shared by Public Works and Fire because they are sort of part of the land development team review process. And this is a little bit of a mistake. All the revenues will be appropriated in their respective departments. Community development will have the lion's share, and the monies would essentially be going toward making improvements to customer service, to either hourly staff or some other way. But the committee basically left it to staff to decide what's the best use of those monies and toward the goal of improving customer service. So I'm going to just kind of keep going until, unless there are questions, then we'll kind of sort of wrap up at the end and bring them all together. So these are the requests. I'm sorry.
Mr. Rouse and then Ms. Murillo.
Actually, this may be a question for Mr. Buell in terms of the community development and the fee enhancements. Clearly, the first questions we're going to get is what do we get for our, what bang do we get for our buck? And you mentioned enhanced customer service. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse. At this point, the money would specifically be going into the ability to bring in hourly help. What we're looking at, and I shared this with the Finance Committee, I believe. We did a survey among LDT staff and asked what, in their perspective, would be the best way to improve customer service. And far and above all the other recommendations is to provide someone in our lobby that has grown very busy over the course of the past few years that can direct traffic. Because sometimes people will wait in line at Public Works, or more frequently they come in, they think that they need a building permit, when in fact they should be talking to Public Works and Planning to understand some of the parameters before they are ready to get a building permit. And so we can save people a lot of time, get a more efficient flow of customers moving through the lobby at Garden Street. And so that's something that we would look to be able to do.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Mayor Schneider. So, Mr. Samario, have you done any calculations on what kind of revenue might be generated from the noise ordinance fines? I know we're not doing it to get money, but and then some of it will go to pay for the program. Is that correct? And has anyone come up with the figure of what might happen?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, that's a really good question. And in response to that, I've heard Chief Kronbach address it. It was either the Finance Committee or it might have been the SBCC Neighborhood Task Force. It's in terms of the specific number of dollars we hope to see come in. Actually, we hope to see very little come in after an initial ramp up. And so it's one of these things, as the program succeeds, the SNAP program succeeds, where we have people going out and addressing noise violators, that could be extremely successful and results in less money coming in. A specific dollar amount we have not estimated at this time.
Thank you.
We do, however, I would want to add that we have $100,000 coming from the SBCC Foundation as seed money to get the SNAP program off the ground.
Wow, thank you to them for that. Thanks.
We have someone in the room. Thank you to please relay, Ms. Martin, relay our thanks to the leadership there. So, thank you.
And just to add that, for that reason, we have not put anything into the budget in terms of an estimated revenue from this. We're going to kind of wait and see how the numbers play out. So funding requests from outside organizations, the committee did consider these, and this is a full list. The top half represent requests for general fund monies, and then the bottom section relates to requests from other funds, if you will, outside the general fund. And as you can see, most of the requests that total almost $409,000 are ongoing. There are two that are one-time, the downtown Santa Barbara. This is additional funding for the plaza maintenance. And then you can see at the very bottom of that top section, the Santa Barbara Youth Council is requesting $8,000 one time, but otherwise they're ongoing. And then down below, they're both ongoing, one from Beacon and the other from the Chumash Maritime Association. So the committee recommended funding, full funding on a one-time basis to the downtown Santa Barbara of $33,700, but that they recommended that the money come from the downtown parking fund. Currently, that contract is split between the general fund and downtown parking, and the committee recommended that Since the downtown parking fund is doing a little bit better than the general fund, that they would be able to absorb this additional 33,700. And important to note that we already built into the budget for next year a 3% increase to the contract, so this will be an additional amount of money that would go to them on top of the 3% increase that's factored into 17's budget. The other item recommended by the Finance Committee was to fund PATH on a one-time basis. And so even though the requests were ongoing, the committee recommended one-time funding. And this is in light of the fact that we're seeing, the general fund sort of facing challenges with the revenues and all that. So we want to make sure we pay attention to that. So they recommended one time. And they didn't recommend full funding, but recommended $75,000 toward PATH. And then the other thing that the committee recommended was funding the $4,500 request from Beacon. The waterfront department would pay for this, and they in fact had already anticipated that they would have to pay this. So this, we don't see this as a big surprise. So how we would pay for the general fund impact of $75,000, this is the funding toward PATH. We'll have to figure this out, but we believe we can identify some money and some one-time money from either the capital program that was proposed for next year or looking at some existing projects, but we don't need to get into those details today. If that's the recommendation of the full council, we'll come back on when we adopt with how we pay for that amount of money. So looking at the general fund capital, this is the full list, almost $3 million. I did point out, or at least highlighted in red, two amounts which are over $1 million. Those are amounts that are funded from restricted monies, restricted revenues that were accumulated over time. So if one wanted to look at the list for things that could be reprogrammed for other purposes, we'd have to exclude those two from the list. So this is the full list of projects. There are other projects that staff brought to the committee that are currently funded, so they're not part of 17's budget, but they're part of either this year's budget or last year's budget. And so these were projects that we felt were not so far along that if the council and the committee wanted to reprogram them, they could. And so we brought 3 projects forward as potential for that purpose. The first was the Cabrillo Ballpark renovation. It is far along, but in terms of money spent, there hasn't been much money, if any, spent. Right now, it's undergoing a HLC design review and coastal development permit application. The other so that project 659, almost 660. There's also the median and parkway landscape renovation project. There's some baseline analysis underway for developing design guidelines. And then the Parks and Recreation Facility Master Plan, that's a $200,000 capital project. Already funded. Work has not yet begun because of the vacancies in the Parks and Recreation Department. So the committee recommendations...
On that point,
Sure.
you said it hasn't begun because of vacancies. When do you expect those vacancies to be filled? So if it was funded, when would it actually start?
I'm going to look to somebody in Parks and Recreation. Mark Sewell, Business Manager.
Madam Mayor, Mark Sewell, Business Manager, Parks and Recreation. We expect the Assistant Director would be the main lead staff on the master plan, and I think that the recruitment is getting very close to being finalised, so within weeks.
Okay, so you would expect the full master plan process to be complete if funded in this next fiscal year. It's not like it
That's
would have
correct,
to
Madam
go
Mayor.
between. Okay, thank you.
So those are the options. What the committee recommended was that we reduce the Cabrillo Ballpark renovation project down to $200,000. That would be enough money to complete the design work. And then the balance of about $460,000 will be transferred to the streets program. The committee also recommended that the monies set aside or funded for the median and parkway landscape renovation entirely be shifted over to the streets program. And similarly, with the master plan, the $200,000 would be shifted to the streets program. So a total amount of money that would be added to the capital program in streets would be about $809,000. So with that committee recommendation, the staff had time to consider this recommendation and has come back with a slightly alternative approach. And one would be to reduce the project for the Cabrillo Ballpark by $159,000 And this would basically limit the project to just the main project, but would take away the basketball court and just minimal ball field improvements. So $500,000 would be necessary just for that. But they also then are offering instead the municipal tennis playground project that's funded at $300,000. They believe that has a lower priority to the Cabrillo Ballpark renovation project since it's further along and it's going to impact more people. And they also believe that they have grant monies that could pay for that, they can still pursue, that would carry over from this year to next year. And so there might be some grant monies available. Plus, there is a portion of the project that relates to some crosswalk improvements that are funded from CDBG, separate from this. And that piece will still go forward because that's a grant application that they've got approved from CDBG. So the recommendation is to kind of swap it out, offer up the muni tennis playground project at $300,000, reduce the Cabrillo Ballpark renovation project by just $159,000, and the other two projects would remain the same, and that would leave still the same amount of money that could be transferred over to the streets program of $809,000.
Madam Mayor, if I can try to clarify this for the council and also explain what our thought process is. So at the Finance Committee, they struggled with streets funding, and they've been meeting on streets and infrastructure, and we're really down low in capital funding for streets. And so the Finance Committee raised the question as they were reviewing the budget was, could we look at some capital programming and reprogram it to streets? They're both one-time uses of money, and that makes logical sense. What's the priority balance between streets funding and capital? So that's why we brought back the entire capital list, and then we put on some additional projects that hadn't quite started as well, so the Finance Committee could have that benefit. So the Finance Committee made a recommendation to defer some of those capital projects to move money into streets. And staff looked at that action and came up with just a little twist that still achieved that goal of what the Finance Committee was trying to do, was get money into streets, and came up with this alternative proposal. And part of the thought process was Cabrillo Ballpark is an existing park that we have, and that should probably take priority of fixing up kind of its basic infrastructure needs ahead of doing a new playground at the Muni tennis facility, especially if we think, and we do think, we can pursue grant funding opportunities for Muni tennis easier than we could pursue grant funding for Cabrillo Ballpark, so if you defunded that. So that's how we came up with kind of this alternative proposal. Gets the same dollar amount into streets, and so that's still a policy question for council about whether you want to do that. And it's a little bit shift. We can do either one. That option is available to you. We just wanted to give you a different way of looking at it.
So what do you get for $500,000 for the Cabrillo Ballpark renovation? What components of it would be complete?
I'll have Rich Hanna come up and speak to some details about that.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor and council members, Rich Hanna, Recreation Manager. So for the $500,000, we would obviously complete all of our permitting and necessary needs to be construction ready. We would improve the pathing and lighting within inside the existing park, which includes the walking path to encourage more people to go to this site and actually recreate there. We would improve both the Cabrillo and Milpas Gateway entrance areas, and then also add the fitness equipment.
So how this would play out from a budgetary perspective is we would be transferring the $809,000. We have another
Do
question?
you have a question, Mr.?
Madam Mayor,
I do actually have a question for Mr.
maybe
Hanna.
don't go
Sorry,
yet.
Mr. White and then Mr. Hart. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So the Muni Park, you're saying that there are more opportunities for grant possibilities there. Could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Sure. Madam Mayor and Councilmember White, we believe that there's some opportunities through the Housing-Related Parks Grant Program, and we believe we can apply up to about $113,000 max. We also believe because of the location of the municipal tennis playground would be, it's in a disadvantaged community census tract, so that would provide another $69,000, which would bring us to about $182,000 makeup of the $300,000, and then pursue CDBG grants for the remaining funding.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hart.
And for the Cabrillo Ballpark, you mentioned doing the walkways and the lighting and then the adult fitness. Is that effectively a decision not to have the basketball court be a possibility, or is that deferring that? Those things were in competition for each other in terms of space, and so I don't want this decision to prejudge that. I understand the utility of what you're saying about the overall trade, but it sounds like there might also be an unintended consequence here.
So, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hart, the entire project had a lot of different moving components, and if we move forward with the pedestrian improvements inside the park, we're still essentially keeping the space where a basketball court could go, or if we were to go in and put a home run fence at a later date, whether those are phased in, those still could occur within this plan. It's just not funded as the plan is moving forward with the remaining funds.
So where does the adult fitness equipment go then? If
the adult fitness equipment is actually spaced around the park, so it was designed to be a circuit. So we have locations set up closer to Milpas. We have some over by the Rainbow Arch and then kind of mid-area. So all of those areas lie outside of where the basketball court was being proposed and shown.
Okay, thank you.
So essentially what will happen is we're going to be transferring the monies that were normally going to go to our capital fund. We transferred instead out of the general fund directly into the streets fund. And it'll be programmed for streets, for paving. And it will add to the existing amount of money budgeted for paving of $900,000. This was a low year for next year in terms of how much money was available for streets paving. So this will basically almost double that amount of money. So bring it up to about $1.7 million. So that completes my presentation. And so, we're looking for direction from council on the things that the committee recommended and anything else that the council feels that it wants us to change with respect to the budget presented to them during the last several weeks.
Great. So if we could have any questions, then we'll go to public comment, and then we'll come back up here for deliberations. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not to discredit the work of either the staff or the Finance Committee, but $900,000 doesn't seem to me to buy a whole lot of paving. Can you describe really what that means? What's our overall paving budget, and what does this adds a certain amount, but not a lot?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director. This will match the Streets Fund, the UUT contribution for paving next year, and I think we have about another $1 million from Measure A. So it will be about a third again what we've got allocated for paving. It should, for grind and overlay, it's about $80,000 a block, so it would get us about 10 blocks. I do want to say this fund, the Streets Fund, is also the only source we have for other things, and I think Council's aware that we have a problem with street lights in Hidden Valley. That the money to fix those lights, we are waiting to get an estimate. It will have to come out of this paving line item as well.
Okay,
and that's about $200,000, we believe.
Okay, so this is about almost a third, though, of what we're...
That's correct.
Right, great, okay.
Unfortunately, it's almost a whole third as opposed to just a tiny little drop in the bigger bucket, right? Ms. Murillo.
Thank you. I did want to ask either Ms. Bjork or Mr. Casey two questions. So are we in such a dire situation that we're doing the worst streets first? I know we do a rotation, to be fair, to all the communities, all of our neighborhoods. So that's the first question. And second, Mr. Casey, I heard you describe our streets PPI, the index, as a crisis. And I would just like a little discussion about that. We have people in the room who are coming, and they need to know that the streets, not a sexy subject, but if you're using the word crisis, I think that's significant. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, maybe I'll start with the crisis response and then let Ms. Bjork follow up as well. I think I'm talking the Streets Fund is in a crisis condition. We brought that back to council in January or February with the significant reduction in gas tax revenues, and then just over the years, the amount that it's been declining. To only have currently budgeted, about $1 million for pavement repair when we really need $8 to $12 million per year, I consider that a crisis. And the less we do on an annual basis, the worse our street conditions will go. And it's a snowball effect. Once you fall behind, they get worse faster. And so that's why we've been meeting with the Finance Committee for the last 3 or 4 months, and we'll continue to do so and bring back some recommendations. We need to do something about our Streets Fund. It really is in a dire funding situation.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, with regard to the pavement, just to put it in a context that I think people can relate to a little bit more, I like to relate it to the roof on your house. If the roof on your house starts to leak, it's more than just water getting in. The underlying structure starts to rot and decay. So keeping the top, the roof of the street through paving and sealing of the roof is really important to prolonging the life of the street and reducing the amount of cost it takes to repair it. With regard to how we prioritize our streets, it's really not just worst first. Some of our worst are already at a place where the cost to repair is substantial. They may not be the highest priority because we might be able to get to that roof, if you will, in time on other very highly traveled streets in order to keep long-term costs down. So it's really looking at all of the variables in terms of how we would best manage that asset. We do prioritize arterials and collectors, and residential streets at this point in time are really getting no priority at all and no treatment at all. And additionally, alleyways we have no plan to replace or repair any alleyways in the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll turn it over to public comment, and if you need to speak, you have 2 minutes here at the podium, and please fill out a speaker slip. We'll start with Tony Wellen, which will be followed by Glenn Batchelor. Come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, City Council. I'm Tony Wellen from the Coalition Against Gun Violence. In the wake of the National Gun Violence Awareness Day tomorrow, the Coalition Against Gun Violence is asking the City of Santa Barbara to follow the lead of the coalition and fund the next gun buyback. In 2014 and 15, CAGV raised $20,000 each year, all from individual donors in this community. That tells us that there are people wanting a gun buyback in this community, and we can only hope city leaders are listening. At the first press conference, District Attorney Joyce Dudley said one gun turned in would constitute a successful event, as it could save a life from suicide, homicide, or accident. Some say that criminals won't turn in guns, but a gun buyback is not just about criminals, but consider a prohibited person, a felon, who may have a gun in his possession. There are now 20,000 illegally owned guns in California. This is an anonymous way for that person to turn in the weapon and be taken off the streets. In 2014 and 15, CAGV sponsored, with the excellent organization of the Santa Barbara Police Department, 2 successful gun buybacks, and 444 guns are no longer in homes that could have caused accidents, suicides, domestic violence, or homicides in Santa Barbara. 20,000 is a small amount when a life could be saved. 20,000 compared to the cost to the city for a gun death investigation, perhaps hospitalization, legal and other costs. A nonprofit, in conjunction with the public sector, can and has made a difference. Now it is time, we believe, for the city to take a lead.
Thank you. Glenn Batchelor will be followed by Chuck Flax.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of the Landlord Liaison Program, and I'm going to ask you to have the vision and the boldness to consider funding this program, which I believe is a game changer in 2 of the most intractable, difficult issues, homelessness and affordable housing. Why do I say it's a game changer? Because, in just 6 months, we've housed 35 people with their hand tied behind our back with limited funding. This is based on a Seattle program that housing between 1,500 and 2,000 homeless people with private landlords. Today, we house between 500 and 600 homeless people in the county a year. 5 years from now, this program, if it's fully funded and given the time, will be housing 1,000 or 1,200. So, and part of the reason this works is this was developed by business, with business, and even our staffer that works with landlords, private landlords, is a landlord herself. That's why this works. And what a surprise, huh? And the best part about all this is that this is incredibly transparent and black and white. One single metric, how many people we house. I can tell you right now, we are well ahead of Seattle in terms of their first year rate. We will double the second year, we will double the third year, and we're going to be doing 400 to 600 more people a year if you have the boldness to support this and fund it. You know, the choice is yours, but I would ask you to be visionary, big, and bold, and you just might get those types of results. Thank you very much.
Chuck Flax will be followed by B.B. Longstreet.
Good afternoon, Chuck Flax with C3H, and very well supported by the council, and I appreciate that. But I caution you, the word crisis was thrown around streets. We are clearly in a housing and homelessness crisis in Santa Barbara. Now is not the time to cut $100,000 out of homelessness programs. The PATH shelter, formerly Casa Esperanza, is a critical resource and a first line of defense for getting people off the street in crisis. And we need every amount that the council can dedicate to support and continue the operations of that shelter. The good news is that we have, and I think many of the staff are here and will come forward, a new energy and vision about how to move people from shelter into permanent homelessness from PATH. And I think that ought to be funded and supported. PATH to homelessness, thank you, PATH to housing. Secondly, I was surprised to learn in the presentation that you're not going to fund the Landlord Liaison Program. I echo Glenn Batchelor. This is a partnership between business and the public sector with tremendous results that he talks about in Seattle. We see an opportunity here to really create a broader array of options to get people off the street. They are currently working with some of the easiest to house. The goal is for them to work with landlords, private landlords, to open up the market. Currently, there are 3 people on the street in Santa Barbara who have Section 8 vouchers who we can't find housing for. It's programs like the Landlord Liaison Program that will allow for that process to work, for the housing market to work. And I think for the small amount that they're asking for, I would hate to see that program hobbled at this time. So consider some of the longer term implications of cutting a small amount of money at this time when we're really starting to make inroads and some real success moving forward. Thank you.
B.B. Longstreet will be followed by Robert Burke.
My name's B.B. Longstreet. I'm a Parks and Recreation Commissioner and the Neighborhood Advisory Council, but I am speaking for myself today. I'm very concerned about the recommendations coming from the Finance Committee and their timing. The Cabrillo Ball Field renovations are well down the planning road, and the improvements are a long identified need. This is not just an aesthetic project. It also addresses long-time safety issues at the site. The Cabrillo Ball Field serves the East Side residents, the sports community, and is a gateway to our city. I liked seeing, which is the first time I saw it today, the modification to keep that project moving forward. It is truly says how important it is to all of us to get this done. Over the discussions, there's also been mention of the UUT funds devoted to street tree maintenance and the Measure B funds being used to deal with infrastructure issues. Shifting the problem does not solve the problem and may hurt the city's credibility. The success of a new tax measure will require that we trust that the city will use the funds wisely. Measure B is closely watched by many people, and the use of those funds must not be used to bail out any other issues in the city. The reality is we need a new source of funding to maintain our infrastructure. We needed it 18 months ago, and it wasn't put on the ballot. This problem is not unique to Santa Barbara. The capital improvement budgets in the city have been developed over a long period of time, and this process seems to disregard that process. Over my 20 years on the commission, I have watched the decline of our parks. Every recession, Parks and Recreation bears the largest burden of cuts to the budget, and the budget is never restored. As a community, we have lost many valuable park resources, and when we looked at the capital needs, that is only one part of the picture. Maintenance and safety are still not at the level that our community deserves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I ask Ms. Longstreet a question?
Of course.
So you like the idea, Ms. Longstreet, of the staff's alternative of looking for other funding for that very important
For the Muni
pocket park, but
I do.
Later?
I think if we want to look at responsibility, we have to take care of what we have ahead of building new. Is it needed there? Yes. It is tremendously needed. It also addresses safety issues at Muni, and there are many. I mean, I think we don't always hear about the nighttime issues and the things that go on in the neighborhoods in our parks. And part of the Muni project is some new lighting and some new fencing and taking down some bathroom blockages and, things like that. So I want to see that project done, but Cabrillo has been before the community for at least 8 years. We heard it from the East Side group. Right. We heard it at NAC. It's been around a long time, and it's made its progress. So
and you made reference to a possible sales tax initiative.
Yes,
and
I
you're
support that.
A community leader, and people know you from your neighborhood work. So you do support it, and if we wanted to do that, we could count on your help.
Well, any of us that watch the news know this is an issue across our country. It's not just in Santa Barbara. It isn't that people have, sat on their hands here and for years or something. I mean, you see the bridges and the things we need to do. So I think it's time we stepped up to the plate as a community and fixed our infrastructure. We're not even talking about the giant elephant in the room, which is our police station. So,
thank you.
Robert Burke will be followed by Joel Roberts.
Madam Mayor, members, I have 2 items. Number 1, to ensure the domestic tranquility means to walk down the street, to shop in the local market, and to go to bed at night without fear of being shot, mugged, or raped. All it takes to change the world is a few thoughtful people gathered to advance a cause that embraces the well-being of humanity. The Coalition Against Gun Violence is a group of thoughtful people who calls upon this group of thoughtful people, this City Council, to advance $20,000 for a gun buyback. The last one was successful, and we ask for a repeat performance. Number 2, to promote the general welfare means that body and soul can retreat from the bustle of the day into not just housing, but a sanctuary of tranquility to rejuvenate heart and mind. The Rental Housing Mediation Board keeps people off the streets and cases out of the courts. I asked the name change from task force to board to achieve an equanimity with the other boards and commissions that was lacking in people's perception of its status. What is true for the Planning Commission, the Harbor Board, and the Housing Authority, and all the other city service groups, I want to be true for the Mediation Board. Yet, the Mediation Board is still the orphan in the storm, knocking on the front door when it seeks money from outside organizations. I hope this council sets a goal that the Mediation Board be 100% financed from the general fund and retire the board's need to seek outside donations, which distracts from its mission of serving the people and denigrates its position as a city agency. Would you demand the Planning Commission or the city manager hold a bake sale for its sustenance?
Joel Roberts will be followed by Peter Barron.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and City Council members. My name is Joel Roberts. I run PATH. I just want to acknowledge that I know that these budget decisions are very, very difficult, and we don't take that lightly. We as an agency also have to struggle with a budget. A year ago, we took over CASA, Esperanza. It had a significant deficit. That's one of the reasons why they approached us. In the past year, we have invested $250,000 of private money from outside of Santa Barbara for the Santa Barbara program. And all we're asking for is for you to keep the existing $125,000 investment in the city. We were trying to struggle how we would, if it reduced down to $75,000, what we would do. And the first thing we want to do is protect the 24/7 year-round shelter. So the only thing we think we can do is close down the winter shelter, which is about the same amount of money, $50,000. We don't want to do that. I'm worried about the people on the streets. We think this is an investment for the city, for tourism, business, neighborhoods. Homelessness is increasing throughout the state of California, and many of the cities that we work in today are increasing their budgets for homelessness just because of this crisis. So all we're asking is to not even increase the budget, but to keep it the way it is. We feel like it's an investment for the city, and more importantly, it's an investment for our hurting neighbors who are living on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Marin will be followed by Catherine Marin. Okay, so you have up to 4 minutes to be, and then you'll be followed by Bonnie Raisin.
You will remember that when we started the winter shelter, the warming centers years ago, we did it because 4 people had died on the streets. I want to repeat that. 4 people without shelter died on the streets. If you eliminate these 100 beds, you're putting out people on the streets, some of whom will die. Those who don't die will get sick and cost somebody a lot of money. Secondly, you'll have the police problems. You'll have to police these people because they're going to be on State Street, exactly where you don't want them. They're going to be in the Milpas community, and they'll be in the parks. And the police will have to ferret them out. And the tickets they give them will be no good because the necessity defense will work in every case because there will not have been available beds for people to go to. So when you think about reducing the $50,000 to CASA or to PATH, you're really raising costs across the board for the city, and you're creating immense problems which need not be created. These are 4 months in which people are relatively safe. They're not at risk on the street. They're not going to die. Remember, we had a man in a wheelchair. We called the warming centers the Freedom Warming Centers, and they were called the Freedom Warming Centers because a guy in a wheelchair froze to death or suffered from hypothermia, which is akin to freezing to death, in Santa Barbara. Now, we do have the warming centers, but they will only open up when there are 2 consecutive nights of rain and when the temperature drops below 35 degrees, I believe. Now, we know when the temperature is 40 degrees and on one night of rain, people are still in terrible danger, real terrible danger. And if you cut the budget for PATH, and if they close the winter shelter, then you are putting, it's the worst conceivable thing you could do. I know we need ball fields. I know we need parks, but we do not need dead people in our streets. And there was a time, I will remind you, when Santa Barbara was known as a cruel city, was mocked in Doonesbury, was mocked in the media. You do not want that to happen again. Believe me, you do not want that to happen. And some of us have very few weapons left to fight this with. We can go to court, but we don't have many lawyers left. That's clear. But we can make things uncomfortable for the city. We've never done that. We don't want to do that. When that happened 10 years ago, it was others from outside the city who did it. But this is like a win-win situation to come up with the money and give to PATH, right? And it's hard for me to believe that you can't somehow find the money elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie Raisin, then Terry Nisich, and the final speaker will be Christina Pizarro.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council people. I grew up here and I don't think the temperature ever got to 35 degrees, but that's okay. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to thank the Finance Committee, our Finance Director, and all those involved from the various departments that worked hard to ultimately find extra money for our streets and our infrastructure. I think they did the best with what they had to work with. I have talked often and sometimes in not very complimentary tone regarding the condition of our infrastructure, and this has been going on for years and years and years. But I think the fact that the Finance Committee and the Finance Director and Mr. Casey and the Public Works Department have come up with some solutions that will at least ameliorate some of the conditions, and I want to commend them for that. I do not want to see a sales tax go on the ballot a year from November. We don't know what our financial climate will be like, but just the thought right now of an increase in sales tax seems draconian. So with that in mind, I just want to thank you for your work today, and I would ask that you accept the recommendations of the Finance Committee and our Finance Chairman. Thank you very much.
Terry Nisich.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider and members of the council. Terry Nisich, Assistant CEO with the county, and I'm here today representing not only the county but the Community Action Commission to renew our request for your continued funding of the 211 hotline services. As you may know, CAC took over host for helpline services about a year and a half ago. And since that time, we've been working in partnership with them to address many of the concerns brought to the attention of the 211 helpline, specifically by the 8 cities within the county. So since that time, CAC has really taken on an extraordinary effort and had some significant achievements, and those include the following. They've completed a data scrub of all of the database and have completely rehabbed that, and has increased the number of providers within that database by 22%, which reflects 283 agencies and over 2,400 service programs countywide now within that database. They've also developed a user-friendly website, which was a specific request of many of our partners. That database is now a state-of-the-art database, which is being emulated by various counties throughout California as a way to directly search and obtain services directly, not through the helpline, but through the database services. Over 5,200 residents called the hotline last year. 1,500 of those individuals were directly from the city of Santa Barbara boundaries, which is about 36% of the total calls. Over 3,500 people utilized the new website, and 303 residents in crisis received a warm handoff to crisis 911 services and had their needs addressed. What we're asking for, the county currently funds 71% through both general fund and our specialty funds, and what we're requesting is that our city partners join with us and address the remaining delta, which is a $61,000 cost that we're asking each city to address based on their proportionate share of calls received. So in terms of the city of Santa Barbara, that would be about $22,000. Again, we'd like to renew our request for your consideration of this funding, and we certainly appreciate your funding of this program in the past. Thank you very much.
Ms. Murillo has a question for you.
Ms. Nisich, thank you for being here today. And I serve as the council's liaison to the Community Action Commission, so I can certainly echo what you're saying. We do have some evidence, right, that people don't call 911, they call 211 if that's available. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I can, Councilmember Maria, through Mayor Schneider. We do. There is national evidence that indicates that if a 211 helpline is available, that it takes about 60% of the burden off of the 911 system. So in this particular case, what I was referring to is that we had over 300 individuals alone call 211 rather than 911. So where a 211 helpline is not in place, unfortunately, many folks do in fact call 911 and overburden that system. So this does serve as a bit of a relief valve.
And I know that the word spreads in the low-income communities. We really know what the resources are, and so I think it's terribly important. And I think our city would be, we need to step up and maybe show some of the other cities that they need to as well. And I'm not shaking my finger at them. I just like to give them the example of that we really want to care about people in need that would be helped through this service. If we start horse trading up here, would
we're not at that point yet?
Not at that point? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Mr. Hotchkiss has a question for you.
I do. If I could ask you a question, please. How do you get the word out about 211?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. As part of CAC's program budget, they do have an extensive marketing budget. I don't recall the exact figure, but they've been doing extensive marketing and outreach campaigns as part of their budget. They have initiated an online campaign, and they're also doing extensive advertising. They're advertising on our buses now. They're doing a number of different types of campaigns to really get the word out on 211. They are also placing 211 cards in the hands of all of our law enforcement officers because that is a direct contact. Oftentimes people can be handed that card and be able to call directly for services. So we're doing broad outreach as well as one-on-one outreach to get people more familiar with the services provided.
What's your request this year from the city?
$22,000.
I think actually it's $22,186.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that.
Okay, Christina Pizarro.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider and members of the City Council. Actually, 201 is a great program. As a former commissioner, we always supported that program, and then it used to be part of FSA's program as well, but sadly we had to turn it over. Just wanted to say that before I start my actual comments and why I really came here today. I really wanted to say that gun violence is a reality in many cities across our nation. Sadly, we have been touched and horrified by gun violence in our very own community here in Santa Barbara. Now, this is a critical time whereby our municipality can make a difference and set an example in addressing gun violence prevention measures that will positively impact our community. The coalition has held 2 successful gun buyback programs in the last 2 years, and I feel that it's time that the city step up and buy into this process and fully fund the $20,000 ask, because I think that that is a very, very small price when a life that can be saved is really priceless. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the public comment. It's to the council. Just one quick question and then a suggestion on how to proceed. Was Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, I thought that was funded with general fund money. So can you clarify that? Ms. Gray.
Madam Mayor, Sue Gray, Community Development Department. Yes, it is funded by general fund. The total budget is about $241,000, and we have not asked the Rental Housing Mediation Board to do any fundraising since that 1 year when you guys did request that. Okay. We do receive about $100,000 from the other jurisdictions, the county, the city of Carpinteria, city of Goleta, and I believe that's it. Oh, and the Housing Authority also contributes.
Great, thank you. So I think there are 3 major components, and then I want to open it up to my colleagues if they want to add anything as well. There are issues related to fees, so there's noise ordinance, fines, and then the fees issue, and maybe we can just take care of that and get that out of the way. And then there's the requests from outside organizations, and then the issue about capital and streets, which they might go hand in hand a little bit, but maybe we can take them one section and the other section and see how it comes together. But before we do that, I just want to see if there's anything else related to the budget anyone else wants to bring up so we can just put it all in context. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The one piece that has to do with the budget that I raised during the water fund discussion was the real overload that the management staff is experiencing with trying to handle all the different projects that are going on now, as well as the grants and loans that are being applied for. So there really has been an overload at that department for now during this entire drought period. The desal plant trying to get built timely, the reclaimed water system being rebuilt. So I'm hoping that the council will consider adding funding to the water agency to allow the hiring or contracting of a senior level person to help with the grant writing and the budgeting as we are finding our rates changing year by year, not only going up, but rebalancing as our use of water has dropped so much. So it's been a really tough package for that staff to handle. So that is one budgetary change that I hope that council will consider today. I do have an issue about fees, but it's not for budget. It's a future discussion that I want to raise later in this session.
So just to follow up on that, it'd be a water department section of the budget, not general fund, so that
Correct.
Separate from the other parts of the discussion today. Do we have a dollar amount of what that would mean if we wanted to, Ms. Bjork?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Wright, I think we're looking at probably an analyst type of position with probably around salary and benefit of about $150,000.
Okay. And would that just
Say 100,000?
150 in the water department? And in terms of our rate structure, that would just be absorbed, to use a pun, in the water department. Or would we need to relook at our rates, or how would?
No, we would just absorb it within the existing rate structure.
Okay. All right, so it's just a policy decision whether or not to add that position. And it would, and I guess, come back to council in some capacity, whether it's a staff position or a contractor or whatever the need is. Is that what you're thinking, Mr. White or Mr. Casey?
Madam Mayor, council members, I think if you're interested in that additional support, we would fund a position, and then, like with any position, we can evaluate how we effectuate that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Why don't we first go over the noise ordinance fines and the fees? There was the noise ordinance fines issue on their own, and then I guess the fees. There were some finance committee recommendations which were slightly different than the original recommendations. And I mean, I'd be happy just to say, are we in consensus with first the noise ordinance implementations? Anyone have any concerns about this proposal, or can we just say move forward? Move forward. Okay, check. Ooh, if everything else was that easy, we'd be out of here very soon. Okay, and then the fees, there were some, I guess I'll just go with the Finance Committee recommendation. Was that a 3-0 recommendation, by the way? Just want to see. Okay, just curious. Is there anything to comment or add related to these recommendations here? Or if there's any concerns, or should we just move forward with the Finance Committee recommendations? Just that part, yep. Okay, done. All right, now the tricky part. Let's go through the request for general fund, request from outside organizations. There's the full list right there, and we've heard some public comment, and we do have the Finance Committee. Their recommendations were to, thank you, the one-time funding for PATH for $75,000, not the $125,000, the beacon piece paid by the waterfront, and the downtown Santa Barbara one-time funding coming out of downtown parking. Now, as I understand it, Mr. Rouse, you cannot vote on downtown parking issues or something else.
And the DSB,
issue.
right? Because they're both involved with both Shell.
All right, so you would just have to abstain from that discussion and vote. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So to the outside organizations, Mr. Hart.
Well, I just wanted to add to the information and discussion that on those two items, the funding for PATH and then also the 211 helpline, that there was not a unanimous vote on those two items. There was a 2-to-1 vote. I was in the minority in support of the full funding request for PATH, as well as the funding request from for the 211 helpline. And my thinking in regards to those is that, you know, we're trying in a very difficult budget environment, and I don't know that the public here today really can see the scope of that and the challenge that we have. Those of you that followed more closely may be more aware, but and it is, I think, referenced just by the fact that we are looking at a budget that originally from the staff had a $600,000 reduction. There was a $300,000 reduction in capital funding, and then a $300,000 savings that came from reductions in staff costs by not filling vacancies on a timely basis, trying to create some space and some cost savings. So we're already cutting $600,000 out of the budget. The Finance Committee wanted to be able to make an increased commitment to streets and roads and had to make some hard choices amongst projects. But you know, I think that the critical infrastructure of existing services, which is PATH and the 211 system, are equally important in that equation too. So I would support funding for those. There are many very meritorious additional requests from outside organizations, the Coalition Against Gun Violence, the Landlord Liaison Partnership. You know, those are important things as well. I understand those. But those are new requests of the city, and we are not in a position, I believe, financially to entertain those kind of new requests and have to do triage in some way. And so to me, drawing the line on the existing services, I think in particular the Landlord Liaison Partnership is a great candidate for human services funding on a different cycle. It would require a little bit of delay, and I understand the point that Mr. Flax and Mr. Batchelor made about how powerful that can be as a tool, and I'm supportive of that, want to see that going forward, but do understand that we have this difficult balancing act of trying to find the right level of support for ongoing services versus new programs, and to me, those things fall in those categories.
Ms. Murillo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I start with a question about possibly finding money for some gun buyback, not maybe the whole 20,000, because I'm in agreement with Councilmember Hart that full funding for PATH, that's where I stand on that. Talking about closing the winter shelter, those of us who are engaged with C3H, that needs to be a broad discussion from the warming centers, from the rescue mission. If that is really what's going to happen, there needs to be a very serious discussion. What will happen if those 100 people are not in a shelter? I get cold walking my dog in the winter, and I can't even imagine people sleeping out there in there. So I'm for the 125 for PATH. But to get back to my question, we haven't hired all the police officers that we want to. Is it a crazy idea to find money from the law enforcement pot of money to go for buying guns?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, no, it's not a crazy idea. If you're looking for a one-time funding of that program, that's appropriate. It's just that's $20,000 less that goes to our bottom line that helps supplement the reserve policy and other items. I mean, it all comes out of the same pot at the end of the day, whether you fund it or take it out of the vacancies that we have right now. But I think the key discussion will also need direction from you all on, are you looking at ongoing funding or one-time funding? Those are two different budgetary considerations to make as well.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, we're not buying the guns. The money is being used to purchase certificates as an incentive for people to bring in the guns that will be destroyed. They're like, from Vaughn's or Albertsons or, something like that. Just because you said for buying guns. So just to be clear to the community what the money would be used for.
Madam Mayor, thank you for that clarification. And I would support $125,000 a year ongoing for the shelter. I do support the 211 helpline, just having been in all those discussions. The downtown Santa Barbara, yes, to their $33,700. And I understand under Ms. Campbell's leadership, they're looking at their expenses. And if you're asking for one time, the valuable service you provide, I think certainly a one-time request, yes.
With the final drawings to return to consent with conditions.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, we're going to be talking about that later today. So that, I would just leave that on the table here, that if there's a way to find money for that. But my priorities would be 211 helpline, shelter, and the downtown organization. Oh, and I guess we're just looking at the top one right now, not the beach erosion.
Well, that's waterfront department, so it's not general fund, but you can
Okay,
say yes or no
okay.
to that if you want to. Yeah.
Well, I support those, and I also support one Tamol being parked at the waterfront. As a gesture to our Chumash community, they should not have to pay for one of their boats to be on our sand, which was their sand at one time. Okay. And then, Mr. Casey, if I may just, Madam Mayor, just make a remark about this strange process that we have where people give us funding requests during this time period. It feels very like the people who are here, you're lucky because you heard about it, you got your letters in, we're talking about your causes. There's so many worthy nonprofits right now who aren't sitting here and who didn't get in line for this. And I'm not sure what we need to do to create some fairness. We do have our human services.
Well, we give out $700,000 in general fund money for human services grants, so they are
Yes,
well
ma'am.
aware about that. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note that this seems like unfair that just some people come and ask for money and others don't. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Hart, just to be clear, the PATH funding, were you recommending ongoing or one time?
Personally, Well, I think it's ultimately going to be ongoing. We can do it 1 year at a time. I know PATH would prefer to have it be an ongoing commitment. I would not vote to take the money away. So in future years, I would be supportive of including that money. But if it helps to get the full funding this year by talking about it in terms of one-time funding, whatever it takes to get to success.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I first had a question for Mr. Casey. We're talking about warming shelters and PATH and whatnot, and we had, or maybe still have, a fund somewhere that came from the mitigation of the Parker project, or was it the Law Entrada? Is that still out there? I know that was for, I think it was emergency shelter money, or what was that? I forget. I ask you this every year, by the way. You should know this by now.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember, that was a mitigation fee the Entrada project paid for the loss of low-cost visitors serving bedrooms, hotel rooms. And so that was $1 million mitigation fee. We haven't found a way to subsidize new low-cost hotel rooms, so we haven't spent the money. We've used some of the interest income off that to help with temporary overnight stays with Transition House and other partners, but it's a fairly limited scope in that regard.
How much is left in interest?
Madam Mayor, the last time I looked, there was probably $25,000 left. We had a lot of interest at the very beginning when the city was actually receiving interest on funds, and that's dwindled in the last few years.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's a line of thinking. Would $25,000 to PATH fit that category under the requirements?
We have given PATH, formerly Casa Esperanza, a grant for that to be used just for police beds, to do an overfill for police beds. It was the former city attorney's position that the interest earned on the funds could be used for overnight accommodations.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Rouse. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thanks. I just remember talking about that at one time in the interest, and we have done some warming or emergency warming shelter beds over the time with that, but I remember that from before. Excuse my voice. All right, I very much appreciate the Finance Committee's work. I know those are some tough decisions. The money that is extraordinary to our presented budget, does that still keep us with the ability to fully fund our reserves this year? In other words, these requests, are they over and above what it takes to keep our reserves full, or do we have to dip into reserves in order to fulfill any of these requests?
Madam Mayor, council members, I guess it depends on how you decide to fund these things. If you're going to just swap one thing with another, then it's not going to have any impact. We're expecting that next year, by the end of next year, we're going to still be fully funded, just barely in our policy reserves. But anything you add that would require the use of reserves to pay for it versus taking some existing appropriations to pay for them, whether it be capital or something else, then you wouldn't have any impact on that. So it just depends how you fund those things, if that helps.
All right, very well. Yeah, I mean it does because of, the idea that everybody, anybody can apply, and we've done all the 700,000 general fund largesse, which is two very important and very worthy groups, but it's not an ongoing. We can't just we have a responsibility to the public to make sure that our reserves and all our departments are fully funded, and we are once again draining a little bit out of Parks and Rec, which does seem to be the low-hanging fruit every year when it comes down to budget tightness. So I do very much appreciate the work of the Finance Committee and whittling it down the way they've done. Once again, I do have to, I will not comment on downtown Santa Barbara or on the parking fund. The two are related in this thing, so I'm abstaining from whatever that is. Regarding the PATH request, and just on the concept of whether it's ongoing or one time, well, clearly they're always going to have ongoing needs, but given the changes that we've gone through over recent years, I would still appreciate making it a one-time financing and the ongoing update and report that we need to determine what we're doing, because we had goals, we had things that we set out originally when Casa Esperanza was created. We've had a huge change in the way things are being run. We've got a new model. And in terms of the overall budget, where we're going, what the measurables are, I would like to hear from these folks at least a couple of times a year so we can determine exactly where we should be in our participation and where the county should be in their participation and how we're dealing with the entire human services budget. So are we voting yet, or are we just kind of taking a survey?
We're talking, and I'm going to see if there's a consensus somewhere, and we may need to vote.
Okay, so
So a dollar amount would be good for PATH of what you're thinking about. I hear the one time.
yeah,
For how
and
much?
I would, well, excluding what the DO request was, I would support the Finance Committee recommendation.
Okay, so the 75. Okay, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to ask about the 211 helpline. It's my understanding that in the past, 211 has gotten money through the Human Services grant process. Is that correct, Ms. Gray?
Mayor Schneider, Councilmember White, that is in fact true. Back when it was with the Family Service Agency, they received about $20,000 a year through the Human Services process. When Family Service Agency let it go and the county ran it for a year, there was a year where they got no funding. And then in fiscal year 2015, they came to council like they're coming right now and asked for $20,000. The next year, well, the current year, they went to the Human Services Commission and received $16,000.
So the city has committed $16,000 to...
For the current fiscal year, not for next fiscal year.
Yes, and so then did they not apply this year? Is that what happened?
It's my understanding that there was a miscommunication between the county and 211 CAC as far as the application and who's responsible, although Ms. Nisich, I'm sure, could answer.
Ms. Nisich?
Yes, thank you again. That is correct. We believe that CAC was going to apply. We didn't communicate thoroughly. Neither one of the agencies did apply. Therefore, we're here before you today. The $16,000 was allocated for last year, and we certainly appreciate that. We are, however, requesting the $22,000, which is the full proportionate share. But unfortunately, we did not apply for the human services funding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, anyway, that's the, I think that's the place where there was funding potential for that activity, which doesn't seem to have come to fruition. So that obviously was a concern in Finance Committee, and it seems like it's adding $22,000 to the Human Services budget that the city has already created and funded. And I at least from my vote on the Finance Committee was driven by that area. Obviously, this list of extra requests is one that has total merit from top to bottom, and I could support each one of these in better times. Mr. Casey described the fundamental piece of our city that is in crisis. There are others, but that our street system is really on an edge, and that we need to be looking at our priorities and providing this safety service to our constituents and to the people in the future. And there's nothing easy about these decisions, and the list that was derived out of Finance Committee is an imperfect and best shot at trying to move through this tough year and still acknowledge at least two of our great needs: the reasonable paying back is the way I look at the downtown organization element, and the funding, continuing to provide funding for PATH, which is doing such a wonderful job there. So again, no easy choices there, Madam Mayor, and that's how we how the Finance Committee, at least the majority, got through this list, and luckily most of it is unanimous, with just those couple of exceptions.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I think the Finance Committee did have to bite the bullet a little bit and ask some of you to do the same. I don't find those requests, well, they're maybe not fair, but unreasonable. I do wanted to know about this, a minor thing with the bottom line there. We're talking about the Chumash Maritime Association. Is that part of the Chumash tribe?
I think the entity is the Chumash, the Barbareño Chumash Council.
So are they members of the Chumash tribe?
They're the council. They're the coastal band, separate from the San Ynez band. So they don't get casino money, if that's what you're thinking.
Well, I'd like them to go ask the casino folks for $250. I think they could afford it. But the rest of it, I would go along with the finance recommendations.
Okay, I don't see any other lights on. I'll chime in then and see. So first off, I want to appreciate the Finance Committee of going through the process. It's a tough decision. I know we still have part of the other conversation about capital and streets and all of that. I do think on two things, and maybe I can maybe gather some other colleagues around that. I do think PATH needs full funding. But to make it one time, even though I'm just trying to keep the conversation going, keep the funding going for next year, I think we really do need a conversation of what is the city's role in totality related to funding for homeless-related services. I think it's a worthy conversation that we should have for PATH, not just PATH, but in the bigger picture, all the different organizations coming around. And we've toyed with that conversation off and on in the last couple of years, but we still need to have it a little more thoroughly. But I think the cost of not fully funding PATH will have cost elsewhere within our city system, if not in dollars per se, then in productivity, especially with our either Parks and Rec department or police department and fire department. So I think it needs full funding. We can find half of the gap there, I think, from the Entrada interest. So the Finance Committee recommendation was $75,000. I heard there's $25,000 left in interest from the Entrada. That brings it up to $100,000, and then it's just finding another $25,000 to do full funding. That's another way to try to fund it without getting into reserves. And then I really do think we've had two very strong gun buyback programs. The Coalition Against Gun Violence went well above and beyond the capability of a small coalition organization to find $20,000, which is a big ask for them. I think it's relatively small ask for us to work with the police department on something that we know works. I even know our police department was hesitant in the beginning of thinking it would work, but then going to Los Angeles, going to other areas, doing it ourselves twice, really seeing some great results. I think it's a great opportunity to fund and maybe do it one time and have a better conversation in the future with a new police chief once that person gets started. So I would strongly recommend funding the Coalition Against Gun Violence. I understand everyone on the Finance Committee knows the need was there and it's a good program, and I understand the rationale behind not funding it, but considering that we've had the actual event twice, it's new money in the sense of new money paying for the incentive cards or the gift certificates, but the program's not new. So there is a little difference there than a brand new program. And then I appreciate what was being said about 211. I do think, Ms. Murillo, you said it very well. We could have a whole bunch of nonprofit organizations asking for funding, and why aren't they here? It's because we have $700,000 set aside for human services funding, of which 211 has been the grantee of for many, many, many years. I think it kind of opens the door a little bit if we go outside that process for 211, and it's unfortunate that there was a miscommunication with the application not being submitted on time. But every organization, I hear that every year from some organization, and every year we say, I'm sorry, but please apply next year. So I fully expect they applying next year, getting funded next year through the regular process. I just don't want to set aside something special and different, because I think that's setting a precedent that we don't want to go down, and we've said no to so many other organizations. And then the landlord liaison project is the only other one that I'm on the fence of. And as much as Mr. Batchelor, you do an amazing program. I'm not seeing the votes here at all, but I do strongly, strongly recommend that you apply for CDBG funding. I think that's a perfect category where it can come in. I think it's part of the bigger picture of where we fund homelessness services. It is a brand new project that we haven't even seen before at the city level in terms of funding. If there was more support up here, I'd be one of the 4 or 7 votes, but I'm not seeing that. But I think this is a great opportunity for us to educate us about what the program's doing, get some programs going, and go through Human Services. I believe you will get some significant funding and strong funding through that process. Unfortunately, just not today. And then everything else, the Beacon and the downtown Santa Barbara, I'm perfectly fine with funding as per the recommendations. So those are my comments. Jason? Mr. Dominguez?
Thank you. I go by both. The funds for PATH, this is a new process to me. The budget here is quantitatively bigger than I've dealt with before and qualitatively different. There's a lot of moving parts, so I've been rapidly wrapping my head about how this works and it functions. And with PATH, we have a brand new management team, a brand new director who was just hired a few weeks ago, coming in after a new nonprofit took over a year or so ago. And everyone knows the history of Casa Esperanza in Santa Barbara. And they do very valiant, noble work, and it's always a struggle, especially in the economy of the Southern California region, within California, within the U.S. They're under a conditional use permit, so we have kind of a quasi set of performance measures where we're constantly looking at the work they do. Every 2 months, there's a Milpas Action Task Force, which Councilmember Hotchkiss and Murillo and I attend. And so we sit down with them, and several of our city agencies and local residents and businesses sit down, and they hear all the feedback, and they need to respond to it, and they're doing a great job. So we do have some built-in measures which we can use to evaluate them as they go, and we can make them more stringent and more specific. That's great. I know they have institutional best practices and industry standards that they're really good at applying at all of their branches around the state. So I'm very encouraged by that. So I would push for the full funding as well. And regarding the gun bag back, again, I think that's something that's leveraged strongly with saving money in other departments of the city, with the police department in particular. So that's something that I would also sponsor. One of the difficulties in having this kind of ad hoc process that's not part of our normal process is comparing apples and oranges. And one of the things I did when I was working at a legal nonprofit is we had to decide internally what programs to support. So we kind of created this test, and I came up with 7 factors that you could use to compare across indexes, including did it leverage programs you're already prioritizing, and both of these organizations do that. And at the same time, I want to make sure that we encourage them to keep pushing for outside funding and holding fundraisers. But I was definitely impressed by the encouragement from the community who supported both of these projects.
Okay.
Can I mention one last thing?
Yes, go ahead.
And Councilmember Hart was very generous and offered to cover the $250 on cost of the Chumash. What's the vessel called? Tomol. So I think that's something we probably don't have to vote on if he's still so inclined.
To waive a fee. Is it an annual fee or a one-time fee, the Tomol?
Yeah, it's an annual fee.
And they're asking for just a one-time, they're asking ongoing. Okay. All right.
Madam Mayor, may I throw in, were we talking about the Tomol? Because I understood from the Waterfront Department that they could afford that and absorb that, $250 a year ongoing, as a gesture of the waterfront to the Chumash community. He's not here, but I heard Mr. Reedman say that.
Madam Mayor, council members, I mean, we're not talking a big dollar number there at all. I think Finance Committee was right, kind of raising the policy issue of waiving permit fees for one entity. You'll get requests from others to waive their permit fees as well. And so that's just the slippery slope. If you want to waive this one and say this is the only one, you're not going to ever waive another one again. I mean, the $250 from a budget standpoint is not the substantive issue.
Okay. Did I hear, Mr. Hart, were you for, or were you, what, I heard Mr. Hart, Mr. Dominguez say Mr. Hart.
I called Mr. Ward from the Maritime, Chumash Maritime Association and said that I would help with fundraising for that. And I made a couple of calls and I've identified a source of funding for that. And then I'm meeting with him, I think this Saturday, to talk about a longer term strategy. But at the Finance Committee discussion was exactly as Mr. Casey described, that I think all of the other boats that are on the beach side are also nonprofit organizations that are very worthy, and I would expect them all to come in and ask for a fee waiver too. So we can make a distinction. I think the Chumash is probably a pretty bright line about making a distinction, but it is a slippery slope in regards to just about all the city facilities.
So you did find $250
Yes.
for at least this year?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Dominguez, your light's still on. Did you have something else? Okay, so let me suggest this. Mr. Rouse needs to abstain from the downtown Santa Barbara item. Can we just at least do that one first? And you have to leave the room? All right, why don't you get out of here, Mr. Rouse?
Move approval.
No, hold
Do I
on,
have to
hold.
wait
He
a-
has to wait till he leaves the room, you know. We got that state law stuff, you know, whatever.
Move approval of one-time $33,700.
Okay, and that's to the downtown Santa Barbara, and it's paid for out of downtown parking. Any questions on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. All right, come on back. Thank you. That was with Mr. Rouse absent, or abstaining, really. Okay, so the other item, which I think also is not having to do with the general fund, is Beacon and its waterfront. Was there any conversation on that item?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Hart, second by White. Any comments? Ms. Murillo, your light's on. Did you, on Beacon?
I was going to make a motion about PATH, but.
Okay, well, hold on for that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so this is just Beacon. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that one, those two are done. Okay, now we're down to, so just before you make a motion, I'm seeing, for PATH, I certainly see the 75. The question is if it's full funding. Well, we'll see where it goes. Why don't we do that, Ms. Murillo?
Councilmember Dominguez said he was for the 125, so I think there's four. Madam Mayor, I move a $125,000 one-time funding for PATH this year.
Second it.
Okay.
And Madam Mayor, if I
yes.
could comment on that, I do think PATH, we've been in this 3-year discussion with PATH where we've funded $125,000 each year and kind of say, keep proving your good work and then come back, and that's what they've done here. And so I would agree it's helpful for us to be able to use one-time money this year. And then my assumption would be is that we'll try to build it into the next year, 2-year budget, but see where our finances are and how that's going as well.
So you're saying I should leave it at one time? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but we'll take this kind of direction to try to build it into the ongoing budget when we
Thank
come back
you.
with the next 2-year budget.
Okay. And the issue of the Entrada interest, does that help soften the blow? Can we do that? Is that,
Sure.
Ms. Murillo, is that part of your motion? I
Yes,
think that might
ma'am.
help soften the blow. So 125, of which 100 is from general fund and 25 is from the Entrada interest. So to that motion, any comments? Okay, I think we're going to have a split vote, so maybe we should have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Dominguez? Hart?
Aye.
Hotchkiss? Murillo?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
White?
No.
Mayor Snyder?
Aye. So that passes 6-1. White opposed. Okay, good. All right, PATH, see, good. That was, that's that. Okay, so I think the only other item that I saw perhaps a majority vote that's separate from, the only other item that was left, I believe, is Coalition Against Gun Violence. If there was any further discussion or a motion on that item. Mr. Rouse.
Just a question. So, once again, this money is requested to be ongoing, and the source would just be general fund? Is that how it's put out?
Yeah, I mean, their request is ongoing for $20,000. We need council direction if you want to build this in as an ongoing police budget item,
And
or
did
whether
they-
you want to do it one time.
Did the organization talk about frequency of events? Was it 1 a year, 2 a year? How does that?
1 a year.
1 year, that's,
Right.
but that's part of the deal?
That's their recommendation.
They're here if you have any questions for them.
Yeah, Ms. Wellen, if you wouldn't mind, Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, the annual events, and you yielded how many turned-in weapons in the last couple of events?
444
In the last one, or
in two.
in two? Okay. And so, to do that, how much incentive did you require to garner that many weapons?
Incentive?
I mean, how many incentive dollars did you have to produce, or coupons, or whatever? However, you got people there.
How did you spend the $20,000? What was it used for?
We purchased $20,000 worth of gift cards. In the first year, we had to basically go to the bank for 5,000 more. We ran out of them, but we are budgeting for $20,000 for each, doing it once a year for gift cards. We give $100 for handguns and $200 for assault weapons, $100 for rifles and shotguns. But we would settle for a lower amount just so that we could have this gun buyback, because this is something that the city really needs. We have had 3 major gun violence episodes here, and it could happen at any time. And it is a demonstration by the city also that you're doing something about gun violence. And I have to commend the police department, because Sergeant Riley Harwood is sitting right there. He wasn't totally convinced at first, but now he did a marvelous job, and it shows the community how they work well, doing something besides patrolling and arresting. It has a community goodwill aspect to it, and we never know what that gun could be taken away because a child, a homicide, a suicide. And also, I know that Joyce Dudley is very much concerned about the prohibited persons, those people in our community who are felons and who still own guns. They can turn them in at this gun buyback. So if you were to ask me, would I suggest a reduction in the amount, I would certainly say yes.
Okay. And then in terms of your efforts, because there's some letter writer wrote in, the Guns Know No Borders, is this also a county-wide effort, or do you do it in the county as well? And is there also a source of funding coming in from outside the city of Santa Barbara?
Well, we advertise the gun buyback, and people come from other places. I mean, somebody came from Camarillo. They hear about it, and then they want to come in and turn in their gun. And essentially, we don't care where they come from, because we are a county organization. Certainly, I would love to see the county weigh in on this and see if there could be more other cities like Santa Maria, most specifically, who would participate. But I'm here and not there.
And then this may be a question for Sergeant Harwood. When we do receive these weapons, do we do any kind of tracing or tracking of where they came from, or what they might have done, or what they may be involved with, or are they just simply destroyed? What do we do with those?
Mayor Schneider, Councilman Rouse, one of the big selling points, so to speak, of the gun buyback was the fact that people turn in these guns anonymously. So the only effort we made with regard to any kind of tracing what they might have been involved in was to after the buyback, run their serial numbers to determine if they had been reported lost or stolen or appeared in our database. And if they turned out to be lost or stolen, then we would return the item to the rightful owner. But otherwise...
But there's no jeopardy for the person turning the gun in. There's no
Correct.
look back to them.
We purposefully do not take photographs of people, write down license plates, or ask for identification. It's as anonymous as it can be.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Ms. Wallen.
You're welcome.
More questions? Mr. White, then Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you. So I think that Mr. Rouse was talking around an important piece here. So do you apply for grants from the county or from either of the other cities on the South Coast?
No, we've applied for grants to, grant organizations like the Fund for Santa Barbara and that sort of organization.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gone physically up to Santa Maria. I know that District Attorney Dudley did speak to a chief's meeting at one time to get the feel of the chiefs about it, because we have to have law enforcement to buy into this process. But certainly I would be willing to, as I say, I'll be willing to go anywhere and speak to anyone to help this cause.
Well, we certainly know that and appreciate your work there. That's one area is clearly the guns can come from at least the South Coast. And so that's an area where going forward, and I would hope that you would give strong consideration to reaching out to our three compatriot agencies here, the county, the city of Carpinteria, and the city of Goleta. Just that they're all beneficiaries of this program, and even though it's headquartered in Santa Barbara. And then, see, there was another question I had, or at least a comment. It's clear that with these sorts of programs, I know it is, that the having sponsorship or having participation by the local government is an important ingredient. It certainly is one of the reasons why I support the human services grants, is that when organizations go out and do fundraising, they have the ability to say that the city of Santa Barbara is buying in literally with some of its own cash to participate in these nonprofit activities. So that's an important leverage point, I think, that is worth consideration. Would this also have the opportunity to be a human services grant? And I'm seeing Mr. Casey shake his head.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, council members, no, I don't think it would compete well with the criteria that we've set up through the human services grant process.
Okay.
I think if council's interested in funding this at whatever level, if it's $20,000 or if it's something less, I would suggest that you consider just directing staff in the police department to participate in a gun buyback program in an amount not to exceed, and we'll absorb it within the police budget. You know, when you get below $20,000, it's within my authority to expend that kind of money, and we can find it if there's interest to do that.
Okay. Well, I'll be interested to hear what colleagues have to say about what that amount is. I think that the element of having it be a city, that they have the city imprimatur as part of the buyback program, I think is an important piece of this puzzle. And so I'll be interested to hear what others have to say. I could certainly consider a smaller amount and be in favor of that.
Well, one last word. I think that if the city would consider a smaller amount and be the lead city in Santa Barbara County, I would have a little more leverage with other cities.
Great. Yep, thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss, did you have a question for Ms. Wellen? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
just first off, you said a very unusual thing here today, which was, I'm willing to consider less. Congratulations. Thank you. In the past, do you end up using all of the coupons, whatever you call them?
Gift cards, yes.
Cards? All right, so there's nothing left over, no?
No, and in the first year, we actually had to go and get more.
I see. Sergeant wanted to jump in, yes?
Councilman Hotchkiss, Madam Mayor, in the first year, we gave out over $22,000 worth of gift cards, all the gift cards, and then started giving out cash at the end. The second year, we gave out over $13,000. I suspect that if we do this event annually, there will probably be a diminishing return. We'll get to an actual figure, and it'll probably be much less than 20,000, probably closer to that 13,000 mark that we saw.
You mentioned before that you trace the numbers on the guns and those that are either stolen or reported lost or returned. Do you remember what percent at all are in that category or were in that category?
Yes, sir. We did not have any that came back as reported stolen.
None. Okay, so these are all guns off of somebody's shelf or somewhere.
Well, one thing to consider is that there is the possibility that these are weapons that were used in a crime and that are being turned in and we're subsequently destroying. So the decision that needs to be made as far as, does the risk of that occurring, is that outweighed by the necessity of getting these guns simply out of people's hands and off of the street? And that's something that we look to you to decide.
In the brief research that I did, my understanding is that to some, maybe even a large degree, these are often guns that are inherited by somebody. They don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to get rid of them. And then they take advantage of this opportunity, which is invaluable. Am I correct?
Well, that may be true in some cases, but then there are also families with children who decide that they don't want a gun in the house.
Well, those could be the same group, actually, but
yeah,
yes.
Could be. But the first year, we were surprised to receive 6 assault weapons. I don't know who turned those in, but that was, and they were valuable. They were certainly worth more than $200.
Okay. Well, I agree with Mr. White. I'd like to give you something. I don't know what it will be. And the final thing I wanted to say was I'm worried about giving you too much because you become dependent on government. That's the last thing you want to do. Your independence is valuable.
We definitely are independent, and we welcome a partnership with the city. That's what we're looking for.
Well, if we can be a part of this, that would be good. I just don't want to be the whole, if I can put it that way. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for all your questions. I appreciate it.
Mr. Hart, did you have a question or?
I just had a comment.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wellen.
I think that our conversation here has kind of given us a new path about, a lower level of funding commitment and a matching grant component to our neighboring jurisdictions. And I think that feels like there's a strong consensus up here on the council for that kind of a program. So I'd be supportive of that as well.
Okay. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you. I would support, I'll throw out the number 10,000 for the Coalition Against Gun Violence, but really with a one-time stipulation, because I would like to see the group do some private fundraising and also ask other public agencies. And we got a letter of support from the District Attorney's Office, and I'm not sure if AB 109 or there's some other pots of money out there that someone of the arena of the district attorney can find money for a gun buyback. And in that spirit, I really would also like to suggest that we give half of the request to the 211 helpline. And really, Ms. Wellen, when I look at what our city does and the things that we do to address poverty and our low-income families, the needs that they have, and how they find services through 211, that actually is a little closer aligned to what I think the city should be doing. And I would also like to enter into the discussion so 11,000 for the 211 helpline. And we would be making a contribution, and the county has thrown in quite a bit of support. You're here, Ms. Nisich, and I know of monetary resources, staff, and a lot of people rely on the 211 helpline. So if I could ask my colleagues to please consider half of the 211 request as well.
So I think we have different opinions on both items. So do you want to do a motion for each, or how do you want to handle that?
Yes, ma'am. I move a $10,000 one-time funding for the Coalition Against Gun Violence buyback.
Okay, moved by Murillo, second by Dominguez. Mr. Rouse, did you on to the
Yeah,
motion?
thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with the motion. I was wondering if we could put that in the language of a not to exceed number for Mr. Casey.
Okay, that not to exceed. They'll probably use the whole 10 at this point, but yeah.
Right, and then the one-time check back, I think, is a very, very good idea to see what the progress of the program is and give them some leverage to talk to their neighboring communities. Thank you.
Okay, Mr.
And
Hart?
as one other piece, it just contingent on making a formal request of the County of Santa Barbara, the City of Carpinteria, the City of Goleta to also contribute to the effort.
Are you saying that the money's only available if they contribute, or you
No, I
just
think
want to
we
request?
just want to request, just want them to go on the record. I mean, clearly there is no boundary to who is contributing guns to this effort, and our neighboring jurisdictions ought to contribute. We're adding the staff time in addition to the money to support this effort, so I think it's appropriate to ask the neighboring jurisdictions to contribute as well.
Okay, is the maker of the motion okay with that?
Yes, ma'am.
And the seconder? Okay, so the motion is to allocate an amount not to exceed $10,000 for a gun buyback within the next fiscal year, and to send a request letter to the county and the cities of Goleta and Carpinteria. Those are the ones you were thinking of, to ask for their consideration.
Just clarification, who did you want to send that request?
I'd like the coalition to send that request.
For the coalition to send that request to the other agencies to ask them to participate in that process. Okay, so you got your marching orders for that. Okay, anything else to the motion? Okay, let's try. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous. Good. All right, and I think Ms. Murillo, you had another motion in mind.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With a nod to the hard work of the Community Action Commission and their mission of addressing poverty in our community, I move that we fund $11,000 to the 211 helpline.
I'll second the motion.
So, okay, so I said it was half. It was half an amount. 11,000.
11,000.
And seconded by Hart. Okay, so that is to the 211 program.
And one time.
One time. To the motion, any comments? Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. But I believe the discussion was back to the timing and then, of course, the music communication with the county about getting on the block grant schedule. Is that the issue with this funding
I
or
think
lack of there?
that's the reason why I believe the request is to us today, because, in part, because there was no application to CDBG funds. Yeah.
Right. And to me, since that is a regularly scheduled thing, I don't know how and why that was missed. I don't want to point fingers, but now we're asked to make up for that. I don't see where that.
Okay, Mr. Hart.
It's our low-income families who would suffer, Councilmember Rouse, if this is not funded at least halfway.
I don't disagree with the efficacy of the program. I'm just, where do we draw the line on this?
Okay. Any other comments to this motion?
Only that I don't think it's low income. I think everybody, regardless of income, uses the 211.
Okay, so there's a motion for 11,000 to the county for the and to CAC or whichever agency. I guess we'll go to CAC for 11,000 for the 211 program. I believe there's going to be a split vote on this one, so let's do a roll call.
Councilmember Dominguez? Hart? Hotchkiss? Murillo?
Aye.
Rouse?
No.
White?
No.
Mayor Snyder?
I'll vote aye.
Thank you.
But make sure you remember to vote to apply on time. So that's a 5-2 with Rouse and Bendy. Mr. White, no. Okay, so that is all the requests for outside agencies. On to capital and streets. Right? Are we done with the outside agencies? Let me just make sure. We're good. All right. You don't want to stay for capital and streets? Come on. Seriously. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you all for being here and participating in this piece. If you have any conversations, please take it outside the room so we can continue on. So we are now looking at all right, so we have We have a Finance Committee recommendation and then an alternate staff recommendation, and then there's as is, and then there's anything else. But Mr. Hart, do you want to start this?
I would just say that I think that the staff recommendation addresses the intent of the Finance Committee's recommendation, which was to increase funding for street maintenance, and the distinction between the two projects is better informed by the staff input. Our direction was just to try and direct money over to streets and try and do triage on the capital projects in the least damaging way to the department. So I think this recommendation from staff fits that intent. I defer to my colleagues, but that works for me.
Okay, is that a motion?
Sure, yes.
Okay, is there a motion by Hart, second by Rouse? Okay, so Mr. Dominguez.
So I like the original Finance Committee better, and it may just be because of how the grants work, and so maybe if someone has more information on the grants, but I would favor moving forward with the Muni tennis playground enhancement first, only because that deals with, if I understand correctly, a playground, and so that helps children and kids, so that's something that I've always tried to prioritize, especially with Parks and Rec. It's also in our 2016-2021 capital improvement program, and the Cabrillo Playground is not. And I understand there may have been some history from Ms. Longstreet's comments that it was in an earlier plan. But given the changing demographics, the Muni tennis court, there are a whole bunch of high-density apartments right around the park, lots of kids. There's a couple thousand kids within that area going to Franklin, Adelante, Cleveland. So I think we would just get better bang for our buck. And the Cabrillo Ballpark, the enhancements we have there, some of them are safety, but a lot of them are aesthetic, and they don't add any new services online versus a new playground at the park. So I think it's just a matter of prioritizing. I think we'll get around to both of them at some point or another, but I'd prioritize the tennis playground first, if that makes sense.
Okay, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, as someone who has been pushing for the Muni project from my tenure here, I'd certainly sympathize with Mr. Dominguez's comments, and I would kind of tweak the narrative a little bit to say that this is an existing park in its own right. And so it's not like this is a new park. This is an existing park. I say all that, and yet I also heard staff's comments, and I'll take them to heart, that there are grant opportunities for Muni, which may not be there for the Cabrillo Ballpark. And so that's where I'm, trust in staff and say, okay, you've said there are opportunities out there, and now we'll hopefully see you be able to perform and secure those grant funds over the next couple of years.
Mr. Casey?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember, just a comment on that. There are grant opportunities. We're not assured to get them. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. And I also look at, as well as with the median and parkway landscape renovation and the Parks and Rec facility master plan, we're deferring those items. We will have another capital program in next year's budget, and these projects might pop up that we're unable to fund now. We'll kind of see where the priority setting is at that point.
And Madam Mayor, while I have the mic, the conversation that we had at Finance, and we've had pieces of that here, are that these numbers, which are darn disruptive to our parks program, don't move the needle very much in the paving program. But it is showing our constituency, our community, that we're squeezing every way we can, and or at least as in many ways, in order to direct money to this most essential of facilities that we have. And so I wish that we could say, okay, well, let's take this money and fix the streets. And that's not going to happen. It's just going to be, but it's going to double what we're putting into streets this year, which I would expect to be one of the historic low investment years in our streets we've ever had. And that's unfortunate, and I hope that in the future we're doing much better than that.
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be supporting the motion. With the acknowledgement that the Cabrillo Ballpark has had issues with our street people, it's used by a lot of different populations, and families and children come from the east side there, and the Cabrillo Ball Field really needs to have the support. And I know that in our lifetime, we will see the Muni tennis playground happen. So I feel secure in that. I'd like to congratulate Councilmember White for his leadership in coming up with that idea. A pocket park. I mean, right now the kids can go, they can knock a ball around. It's an open public playground space, not improved, but you had the idea. Let's set aside something that actually the people can utilize. So I think it's going to happen, and but the Cabrillo Ballpark really needs to be in line first. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Madam Mayor, for the record, when I approached park staff with this, it was like, we've got this idea right here. So it was definitely something that had been considered and talked about. So once started, as they say, the ideas had been there, and I feel lucky that to have the staff that we have to have looked at these things as creatively as they did.
Great. Well, Mr. Dominguez, I take your comments to heart as well. I think we have a good likelihood of getting the funding outside, and so we can have everything we hope. And so we're really directing staff to look under every rock and cranny or whatever for grants for the Muni Tennis Playground. And I think, we can still then put more money into streets in a year where the gas tax in particular is just hitting us hard. I appreciate the conversations Finance Committee's having and look forward to hearing your recommendations, because we can only maneuver things around within our current funding structure so much, and we're going to have to figure out how to find $8 to $12 million just for streets repair every year, and that's a big conversation to have. And so I know that's coming up soon, and look forward to that. But I think, like you said, that we're doing everything we can to be as fiscally responsible without reducing the street level to a point where we have to spend so much more in a couple of years because we didn't put in this money this year. I think it's very prudent of us to do. So I'll be supporting the motion. Okay, so we know what the motion is. It's basically the alternate staff recommendation for the savings as listed here on the slide for the capital towards streets. And we had a motion by, it was Hart and second by Rouse, right? Anything else to the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. Great. All right, anything else for the good of the order? Mr. White?
Well, so now that we're done with a review of the details of the budget for today, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So I would like
You also had your water, we did not give direction on the water department staffing. Did we do that?
Yes, we did.
Did we do that? Are we good with that?
Yeah.
We're nodded, yes? Okay, good. All right, so that's taken care of. Yes, Mr.
Right. Well,
White.
just on the topic of dollars, I realized after our session where Mr. Dominguez and I brought up the topics of growth control and development mitigation fees, I belatedly realized that the fee piece only needs a 4-vote majority to move forward. So I would like to move that the council discuss development mitigation fees at an appropriate future noticed meeting.
I'd second that.
Okay. All right. So this is not about AUD limitations or anything that. This is just a conversation about potential fees and
development mitigation
fees at a future council agenda. Yeah. Okay. So motion by White, second by Hotchkiss. Yes. Ms.
Comment,
Murillo.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. What I understood from our discussion, was it last Tuesday or the Tuesday before? And Mr. Casey, I would need your verification, is that we're also looking at the workload of the Community Development Department, and I did not hear support from a majority of the council to look at impact mitigation fees. And I thought we were concerned about the work, the work that it would create for a planning staff that's already very busy and working hard. Please help me.
Mr. Casey?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Maria, I think that would be the conversation. All you're acting on today is to bring it back as an agenda item for us to then get your direction about whether you want us to pursue developing mitigation fees. And one of the things we bring back is our workload and priority setting, and council would need to prioritize this. We have a full plate with our advanced planning section in planning, and that will be one of the issues we'll have to get council direction on when we would reschedule this item for a future meeting.
I was understanding that it would take a year to do it, and then what it would bring in would not be a significant amount of money. I mean, that was my understanding.
And again, I think that's the type of conversation we would have when we agendize the item, to have that kind of deliberation and then get your direction about whether to pursue it. I do think it probably would take a year to do. It may take some consultant money to do the appropriate nexus studies. I don't know how much it would raise. That's why you would need to do the study and develop a program and then partition the funding towards existing uses and then new development. So I don't know what the scope and magnitude is of the fees that you might be looking at.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I just don't think this is coming up in the right way. I think that we are having a discussion at the Finance Committee about the infrastructure deficit, and ultimately there is a financing component to that conversation, and I think that that is the most effective, most comprehensive way to discuss this. I think that there is a real risk that taking this piecemeal disadvantages that other conversation, and I would not recommend that we do this in that way. I think that it is certainly something we can talk about at the Finance Committee in the context of other financing mechanisms and strategies, but I think it's better to be strategic in that way than it is to take these in isolation.
Okay, Mr. Kalan?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, I do need to caution you against debating the merits of this concept now. All the Brown Act lets you do is decide whether you want to talk about it later. I recognize the temptation to talk about the merits of it, but you really can't.
Okay. So all the motion is to put on a future agenda the question of whether to figure out how to look at mitigation fees in some capacity. Mr. Dominguez, your light's on.
And I think without getting into the merits, one of the things staff would look at would be the revenue or cost pro and con. Is this going to cost money over the long run or not? And I know that's something that at least one person brought up at public comment, and something everyone who's watching is concerned about is what the impact is on revenue. And people talk about a sales tax and other ways to raise revenue, but I think we're all being conscious of trying to not raise that and limiting the scope of having to raise more revenue to pay for things.
Now you're getting into, yeah, so you were good up to it, yeah. For me to support this, I think to add to the agenda item, the process in which we come back, like with the information, does it go through finance, does it go, so I think Mr. Hart's comments are good ones, but that's part of, I think, the discussion we should have. So I think we have a split vote on this one, so why don't we do a roll call on, and this is again, just putting it on a future agenda for the topic to discuss. Go ahead.
Councilmember Dominguez? Hart? No. Hotchkiss? Murillo?
No.
Rouse? White?
Aye.
Mayor Snyder?
Aye. Okay, that passes 5-2 with Hart and Murillo against. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? All right, so this means that our June 13th meeting is no longer necessary, and the budget will come back to the council on June 21st on the agenda for adoption. And thank you very much. We are adjourned.